The courthouse felt colder than usual that October morning in 2019. Margaret Hastings sat at the defendant's table in her cream-colored suit, her blonde hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She was 58 years old and looked every bit the successful businesswoman she had been just 6 months ago. The gallery behind her was packed with reporters and curious onlookers, their whispers echoing off the wooden panels. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a folder of documents. She had built Hastings Industries from nothing, starting with a small textile shop in 1985 and growing it into a company worth hundreds of millions. Now she sat accused of fraud by her own business partners, people she had trusted for decades. Her lawyer, a sharp-dressed man named Richard Pemberton, leaned over and whispered something. She nodded, though her eyes betrayed her worry. Richard had been recommended by friends, came with impressive credentials, but lately something felt off about his commitment. In the back of the courtroom, near the double doors, stood Thomas Beck. He was 62, wearing his navy blue janitor's uniform with yellow rubber gloves tucked into his belt. A name tag sat crooked on his chest. Thomas had worked at the courthouse for 15 years, mopping floors and emptying trash bins. Most people never noticed him. But Thomas noticed everything. He had watched this case unfold over 3 days of testimony. He had seen Margaret arrive each morning, her confidence slowly crumbling. He had emptied the trash cans in the courthouse offices and seen documents that troubled him, and he had overheard conversations in hallways that people thought were empty. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Patricia Walsh, entered the courtroom. Everyone rose. Thomas stepped back against the wall, mop bucket beside him, but his eyes stayed fixed on the proceedings. The morning session began with closing arguments. Richard Pemberton stood and approached the jury. His voice was smooth, practiced, but as he spoke, something seemed wrong. His defense felt half-hearted, almost perfunctory. He glossed over key evidence, failed to challenge the prosecution's weakest points. Thomas frowned. He had listened to enough trials to know when a lawyer was fighting for their client, this wasn't it. Margaret seemed to sense it too. Her face grew pale as her own attorney barely mounted a defense. When Richard sat back down, she grabbed his sleeve. "What are you doing?" she whispered urgently. "You didn't mention the financial records, the timeline discrepancies." Richard pulled his arm away, his face cold. "Mrs. Hastings, I'm doing my best with what we have. But those documents prove." "The jury has heard enough," he said curtly, turning away from her. Thomas saw tears beginning to form in Margaret's eyes. She looked around the courtroom as if searching for help, for anyone who understood what was happening to her. Her gaze swept past him, not really seeing the janitor in the back. The prosecution delivered their closing argument with confidence. They painted Margaret as a greedy executive who had embezzled funds and covered her tracks. They showed charts and spreadsheets, all seemingly damning. When they finished, Judge Walsh called for a recess before jury deliberation. The courtroom emptied quickly. Reporters rushed out to file updates. Lawyers headed to their offices. Margaret sat alone at her table, shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Her attorney had disappeared without a word. Thomas pushed his mop bucket forward, beginning to clean the aisles as he always did, but he kept glancing at the woman sitting alone. He thought of his own daughter, about the same age, who ran a small bakery across town. He thought about the documents he had seen, the conversations he had overheard. He had not planned to get involved. Thomas Beck had learned long ago to keep his head down, do his work, go home. People in uniforms like his were invisible to folks in suits. That was just how the world worked. But something in Margaret's defeated posture stirred something in him. He had served in Vietnam 40 years ago, seen good people destroyed by circumstances beyond their control. He had lost his wife to cancer 10 years back, raised their daughter alone while working 3 jobs. He knew what it meant to fight when everything seemed lost. Thomas set down his mop. He walked slowly toward the defense table, his rubber-soled shoes squeaking on the polished floor. Margaret looked up, surprised to see anyone approaching. She quickly wiped her eyes. "Ma'am," Thomas said quietly, "I'm sorry to bother you." "It's all right," she said, trying to compose herself. "I'm fine, really." "No ma'am, you're not." His voice was gentle but firm, "and I don't think your lawyer is either." Margaret stared at him, confusion and pain in her eyes. "I don't understand what's happening. My own attorney won't fight for me." Thomas pulled out a chair and sat down, something he would never normally do. He spoke in low, measured tones. "Ma'am, I've been working in this courthouse for 15 years. I clean the offices at night, empty the trash. I see things." "What things?" 3 nights ago, I was cleaning the office of Marcus Drummond." He paused, watching her face. Margaret's eyes widened. Marcus Drummond was the lead prosecutor. "I found documents in his trash," Thomas continued, "correspondence between him and your lawyer, plans, discussions. They were working together." The color drained from Margaret's face. "That's not possible. Richard wouldn't." "Your lawyer was paid off, ma'am. He threw this case on purpose." "I didn't understand all the legal language, but I understood enough." Margaret's hands flew to her mouth. She looked toward the doors where her attorney had vanished, then back at Thomas. "But why would he do this?" "Money. I expect your business partners probably paid him well to lose this case." She stood abruptly, pacing. But what can I do? The jury is about to deliberate. I have no lawyer, no defense. Thomas stood too, pulling a folded envelope from his uniform pocket. I kept copies when I realized what was happening. I went back and took pictures with my phone of everything I could find. It's not much, but it's proof of the conspiracy. Margaret took the envelope with shaking hands. She opened it, scanning the printed emails and documents inside. Her expression moved from shock to anger to something like hope. Why would you help me? She asked, looking up at him with glistening eyes. You don't know me. You have nothing to gain. Thomas was quiet for a moment. He looked down at his worn hands, calloused from decades of hard work. My Ellie, my wife, she used to say that when you see something wrong, you have two choices: walk away and let it happen, or stand up and do what's right even if it costs you. He met Margaret's eyes. She died believing the world had more good people than bad. I'd like to keep believing that too. The courtroom doors opened. Judge Walsh's clerk appeared. Court will reconvene in 5 minutes. Panic crossed Margaret's face. I don't know what to do with this. I'm not a lawyer. I can't present this evidence. Thomas straightened his shoulders. Then I will. You, but you're a janitor. Yes, ma'am, I know, but I'm also a citizen, and I have eyes and ears. The judge will listen. They'll throw you out. Maybe, but maybe they won't. The courtroom began filling again. People returned to their seats, chattering with anticipation. The jury filed back and Margaret stood frozen, clutching the documents. Judge Walsh took her place at the bench. She looked around the room, her expression stern. Before we proceed to jury deliberation, does anyone have any final motions or statements? Silence fell. Everyone expected the trial to move forward. Thomas stepped into the aisle. His heart pounded in his chest. He had never spoken in a courtroom before, never drawn attention to himself like this, but he thought of Ellie, of his daughter, of all the people who had been silenced over the years. Your Honor, his voice rang out, surprisingly strong. Every head turned. Judge Walsh's eyebrows raised. Yes, who is speaking? Thomas Beck, Your Honor, I'm the janitor here. I have evidence of misconduct in this trial. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Walsh banged her gavel. Order. She looked at Thomas with curiosity, approached the bench. Thomas walked forward, aware of every eye on him. He could see the prosecutor, Marcus Drummond, beginning to stand in alarm. Margaret followed behind him, still holding the documents. Your Honor, Thomas said when he reached the bench, I have evidence that the defendant's lawyer conspired with the prosecution to throw this case. That's absurd, Drummond burst out. This man is a janitor. He has no standing. Mr. Drummond, I will decide who has standing in my courtroom. Judge Walsh's voice was ice. She turned to Thomas. This is a serious accusation, Mr. Beck. You understand that? Yes, ma'am, I do, and I wouldn't make it if I wasn't certain. Show me. Margaret handed over the documents with trembling hands. Judge Walsh read through them, her expression darkening with each page. The courtroom waited in tense silence. After several minutes, Judge Walsh looked up. Where is Mr. Pemberton? He left during recess, Your Honor, the clerk responded. Find him immediately. She turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, there will be a delay. I apologize for the inconvenience. She banged her gavel. Court is in recess. Bailiff, I want to see Mr. Drummond, Mrs. Hastings, and Mr. Beck in my chambers now. The next hour was a blur. Judge Walsh questioned Thomas extensively about what he had seen and heard. She examined every document. She made phone calls. Lawyers were summoned. Richard Pemberton was eventually found and brought in, his face ashen when confronted with the evidence. He crumbled under questioning, admitting that Margaret's business partners had paid him $200,000 to lose the case, with promises of more to come. He had coordinated with the prosecutor to suppress evidence and provide a weak defense. Margaret wept, but this time with relief and fury. By late afternoon, the case was dismissed. Charges were filed against Pemberton and Drummond. Instead, an investigation was launched into Margaret's business partners. As the courtroom finally cleared for the last time, Margaret found Thomas in the hallway. He was back in his janitor's uniform, returning to his mop bucket as if nothing had happened. Mr. Beck, she called out. He turned, a small smile on his weathered face. I don't know how to thank you, she said. You saved my life, my reputation, everything. You didn't have to do that. Thomas shrugged. I just did what was right, ma'am. But you risked your job. Maybe worse. What if it had gone differently? Then it would have, but it didn't. He paused. My Ellie used to say that courage isn't about not being afraid, it's about doing the right thing even when you are afraid. I was plenty afraid, ma'am, but I couldn't watch an innocent person be destroyed. Margaret reached into her purse, pulling out a checkbook. Please, let me repay you. Thomas held up his hand. No, ma'am, I don't want payment. But I have to do something. You changed everything for me. He thought for a moment. My daughter Sophia runs a bakery a few blocks from here. Business has been slow. She could use some help if you're looking to do something good. Margaret smiled through her tears. I'll be her best customer, and Mr. Beck, if you ever need anything, anything at all, you call me. I will, ma'am. They shook hands, and Thomas returned to his work. Margaret watched him go, this unassuming man in a janitor's uniform who had more integrity than all the lawyers and businessmen she had known. 3 months later, Margaret's name was fully cleared. Her business partners were convicted of fraud and conspiracy. Hastings Industries thrived once more. And true to her word, Margaret became a regular at Sophia's bakery. She invested in the business, helped it expand. Eventually she and Sophia became friends, and through Sophia, she got to know Thomas better. On Sunday afternoons, Margaret would sometimes join Thomas and Sophia for dinner at Thomas's modest home. They would talk about life, about second chances, about how the smallest acts of courage can change everything. Thomas never saw himself as a hero. He was just a man who did what was right when it mattered most. But Margaret knew better. She had been saved by someone the world overlooked, someone society deemed invisible, and that had taught her the most valuable lesson of all. True character isn't found in titles or bank accounts. It's found in the quiet courage of ordinary people who stand up when no one else will. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories and leave a comment below telling us about a time when someone showed you unexpected kindness. Let's celebrate the everyday heroes among us.